Okay, well, how about welcome everyone, and fingers crossed, it will all come good. We have Elle, we hope, um, and
Quick
if we do,
wave, quick wave.
oh, there she is, waving, excellent. Um, how it would normally run with a walking writers salon would be I'd do an introduction, and we'd have Elle and I would have a chat for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'd invite you to have questions and things that you chip in. But I think, and then we have a multiple choice quiz. But I think under the circumstances, I think I'll start. But if anyone else wants to chip in a question, they do just when you want to, because I think it'll be a better discussion that way. Are you happy about that, Elle?
Yeah, I'm easy. However you want to do it. It's lovely. It's a joy to talk about walking and writing.
Recording is on.
Okay. Welcome, Nikki. We've got a few problems, technical issues with Elle's connection in Athens. And there aren't many of us on the call, so we're going to invite you to ask questions as well as me asking questions, if that makes sense. So just go sort of straight in if there are questions or whatever. But I'll just start, and maybe those people who can reach the chat and you can write something in the chat, please do. Well, first of all, Elle's introduction. She writes that she's an archaeologist who lives between Cardiff, Wiltshire, and a small hamlet in Hertfordshire. She's bookish, and quiet, but tells a good story. Her work features in a wide range of anthologies, journals, and competitions. And in November 2021, the book My Family and Other Folklore was longlisted for the Nan Shepherd Award. Over time, she's walked a number of long-distance paths in Britain and Northern Ireland: the Pennine Way, the Coast to Coast, the Pembrokeshire Coast Path, the Thames Path, the Ridgeway, various pilgrim routes, of which we'll find out about one tonight, the Hertfordshire Way, the Monarch's Way, Offers Dyke, the Antrim Way, and so on. In fact, the Antrim Way, I think, Elle, is about 160 miles, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite a decent length around the top of the island of Ireland.
Yeah, and she says that during lockdown, she began walking the Appalachian Trail at home along her hallway and using the stairs to get elevation and descent. And at the time she wrote this biography, she said she was 60% of the way. So how are you getting on the Appalachian Trail?
We slowed down a lot when we moved house, but I think probably about 80% of the way now. It's an awfully long way, and it's a lot of walking up and down the hallway and going up and down stairs quite a lot. Oh my God, it's madness. But I had been due to walk it in about 2 years' time, but I was supposed to go 2 years ago to do one stretch with a friend, and because I couldn't go because of COVID. I did a little bit at home just to, and then I just kept going and then kept going some more.
Brilliant. Well, okay, so yeah, you've written this fabulous. Do I call it an essay? But
You could
it's
call it an essay. I mean, I've been just calling it a chapter in this anthology, really.
all right, a chapter in an anthology, and the anthology itself, we ought to say, is called An Open Door. Travel Writing in a Precarious Century, and it's edited by Stephen Lovett. And we invited Stephen to come tonight, but he tells us that he's a school governor and he's got a parent and teachers meeting at the local school of which he's the governor. So he's had to attend that. So he's not come, but he sends his best wishes. And the book itself, what is the Welsh connection? Tell us a little bit about that.
The quote, the name of the book, An Open Door, it comes from Jan Morris, and it's about her perspective shifting the ways in which writers writing about Wales have kind of exoticized it as Welsh writers. We have resisted and turned this around so that we are Welsh writers writing about other places. And in the anthology, a number of people who are writers based in Wales or from Wales write about Wales or write from if you like, the Welsh perspective. on other places, or about the intersection or the crossover between those places and somewhere in Wales.
Great. Well, okay. So for you, you've really brilliantly captured the pains and pleasures of walkers, especially those of us who've travelled, tried a pilgrimage walk. So, in a sense, what drew you to writing, and specifically to travel writing? And then maybe if you can sort of go on and say, well, what drew you to walking to Bardsey Island?
Sure. I mean, um, I started doing sort of path walking when I was at university. So that's plus years ago now, and did the Pennine Way in both directions, and then did the Pembrokeshire Coast Path, and then um, later on did other walks. And I always kept notebooks, just small exercise books, like school exercise books. Kept notebooks, occasionally drew something that I'd seen. Not exactly a diary. Sometimes it was just things that I'd enjoyed, or a particular event, or a particular thing that we'd seen. Some of those walks were done on my own. Some of them were with other people. Some of them were pilgrimage walks, and some of them very much weren't. They were just walks. Um, but one of the things about walking with others is it sometimes takes on the tone of pilgrimage, even if it's not to a historic pilgrim destination. I think there's something just about the quality of walking with others. A pilgrimage is really a walking community, I suppose, is a reasonable description. And that's what they become over time. So I don't think I ever set out to write about pilgrimage, I say, or writing. I just, a couple of years ago, started writing, and some of the pieces I've written since then have been travel writing. And there's this piece with Parthian's anthology, and there's one that won a travel writing prize last year, which was lovely, which was a nice surprise, and probably got me this gig as well. So the Parthian gig. So that made me very pleased. Did I answer
Well,
that question? I don't know. Nearly.
no, I think so. I think you did pretty well there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you chose to write about and why you chose to walk to Bardsey Island?
Um, I wanted to write about this one because it felt like originally it was a pilgrimage that didn't work. When I was a small child, we nearly went to Bardsey, but we didn't actually go. And it felt like a failure. And then I tried it again just after I graduated from university with some friends. And we had a terrible walk. Didn't seem like it at the time particularly, except that we didn't make it onto the island because we got delayed and various things happened. We witnessed a burglary, which meant that we had to wait for the police. And gradually, our optimism was eroded by our experiences. So this third time was, I suppose it was trying desperately to complete something that we'd failed to complete before. And originally, the idea was that I would walk with the same friends that had walked it in our 20s. But without giving away too much, that isn't quite how it worked in the end. It isn't quite how it worked at all. Well, it's a fantastic walk and it's a fantastic destination. And then why writing about it? The way that Parthian managed this anthology was to do a call out to Welsh writers or writers living in Wales or based in Wales, inviting people to submit a proposal. And I really wanted to write about a walk in Wales. And I had 4 that I could have chosen from. I could have done the Southern Wales path, either the one that I did longest ago, which was the Pembroke Coast path, or it could have been the more recent edition. I did Offa's Dyke only a few years ago, but somehow the fact that the northern route across North Wales is a pilgrimage route, and we did it as a pilgrimage, seemed much more interesting to write about when we're talking about travel and purpose, and here's a historic route that has something to say about the nature of pilgrimage, which is a more universal thing rather than just a North Walian thing.
Well, we'll get on to that in a minute because I know, for example, Sonia, who's been one of our cafe guests, has written a pilgrimage book of her own,
Excellent.
and it'd be really good to get some sort of some questions or discussion with her. So Sonia, watch out, we'll pitch a question at you in a minute. But first of all, can you tell us a bit about Bardsey Island? Because when I have to be absolutely honest, when you told me that you'd written this piece about going to Bardsey Island, I had to look it up. I didn't know where it was.
I think lots of people don't know. I mean, if you imagine that the finger of North Wales points into the Irish Sea, where it's actually pointing to, just off the coast of the Llyn Peninsula, is the island of Bardsey. And it's called Bardsey in English either because it's the island of bards or it was named after Barda, who was a Viking chieftain, I think. Um, Historically, it's been a pilgrim route for a long time. There was an abbey on the site. Um, and it's rumoured that there are 20,000 saints buried on the island. So you walk on bones, you're walking amongst relics, which is, I mean, it's in Wales that where you go, it is brittle with relics. That the landscape is populated by the bones of saints, whichever bit of Wales that you end up in. And Bardsey is exactly the same. I used to teach up in North Wales in the University of Bangor and in Coleg Harlech, which was an adult residential college, and taught for the Open University up there. And Bardsey has always been somewhere that's really interested me. A friend of mine who had the chair at the Eisteddfod used to be poet in residence there. So I had quite a lot of thoughts about it in between the two times when I managed to walk there.
Okay, well, I'm just sort of going, having read what and obviously the people in the room haven't read it, but you come out with some fabulous phrases, and one of them you have is you write, "I excavate pleasure in small things." Um, and
Absolutely.
first of all, you're an archaeologist, so a bit of excavation would be only what everyone would expect, but more it's about that when one walks for a sort of kind of a duration or a long period, you do tend to start noticing the smaller things, and the smaller things can be quite important in what you're doing. So, and some of the smallest things can be the biggest pains, for example, like blisters or mosquito bites. But you've actually discovered some pleasure in excavation. So perhaps you could explain a little bit about what you encountered en route that brought you pleasure.
Well, those are something that both my grandmother on my mum's side and my dad has done historically. They've both kept lists of things. My granny tended to leave lists on back of receipts or invoices or bills or on the margins of recipe books. And my dad has had proper notebooks that he's kept since the late 1930s. And my dad has kept notebooks of birds that he's seen each year and flora that he's seen and sometimes fauna, so mammals and reptiles and amphibia and so on. And he's, I suppose, in a certain sense, he's a collector, so he collects these things. But I grew up with him excavating delight in the tiniest thing. I can remember a few years ago, maybe about 6 years ago, we were in a park near where I live in Cardiff, and we saw a jay flying across the park. And Dad said, "Oh, I don't think I've seen one of those since 1973." And later on, he was able to find that out. And I thought there is a great deal of joy in the moment of seeing the jay, but also in the memory of the jay. And of course, a lot of what we have in our small pleasures are not the memory itself, but the memory of the memory. So now I have a memory of my dad memorizing this and remembering this, and I rather love that. But lots of my notebooks are full of things like, this is what I had for my lunch. It was delicious. It was a packet soup. It was an apple or something like that. And I carried my stove, and it was worthwhile carrying carrying all the gas because I've used it. And I regularly, draw little tiny things in the margins, which are things like, here's a particularly beautiful slate fence, which you seem to only find in Gwynedd. And when I wrote about it in the chapter, Stephen, as the editor, said, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean." So I had to send him a picture of this particular kind of slate fence, which is basically split slate, upright, connected at the top wire. The slate lengths are the fence poles, the fence. What do they call them? Like a fence stave next to each other. And he'd never come across it, and it's because it's such a distinctive thing to that part of North Wales. And small joys like that are just fantastic. Also, I was really lucky. I spent every single night, except for the first night, outdoors, and I got extremely wet a couple of times. But there's a joy in getting up in the morning and thinking, okay, it was just water. It's gone now. I've dropped. Let's get going again.
Hmm. No, that's great. That's great. I mean, perhaps I ought to ask you, what are the dreadful small or big things you encountered, which you would have liked to not have encountered if you could? Was there anything that really was a, unexpected horror?
One of my knees was quite bad before I started and was way worse at the end, and it still gives me trouble. I saw a doctor a couple of years ago who told me to stop doing archaeological digs. He said, stop kneeling. It's so bad for you. You're going to have a knee replacement. And I was like, I don't want to. And that was, I talk in the book about limping, hobbling and feeling pretty rubbish. And I grew up with calipers as a child to try and deal with problems with my ankles. And now it seems like what's happened is that the ankle problem has thrown my knee out over time, and that was pretty miserable. And I met some walkers on the route who were coming in the other direction, and they said, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. And I was reminded of that wonderful bit in passage in the New Testament where Jesus tempted not to have to do something. And although I'm not equating myself with Jesus, there was a moment of really thinking, temptation, thy name is Greg, because I could not do it. That would be lovely. It would be really great.
Well,
but I had to. I felt obliged to.
I mean, one of the things you talk about, of course, which was really lovely too, was the fact, well, first of all, that you were taken to Bardsey when you were a small child, but then when you were sort of at university and you planned to do this walk with your friends, and then latterly trying to get them to join up 20 years later and do the walk again, there was this sort of you sort of encountered how quickly people could find an excuse not to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really. I think that some of these things sound great on paper when you're emailing each other or you're on a Zoom call, and then when it actually comes to it, it's a bit of a nightmare. And committing to walk quite a long distance when you haven't walked, and you realise that you're in your waddlesome middle age as opposed to your bright young can manage to carry 14 kilos on your back kind of thing. And I'm not surprised most of my friends dropped out. Don't blame them at all. But I'm also glad that I didn't. I'm glad that I made myself go forward.
And so you weren't walking as a community because you weren't surrounded by the people you thought you were going to set out with, but you managed to. Because the other thing I was sort of kind of feel is that when you do walk a well-trodden pilgrim route, you often meet other people, and because they're all walking at no one can walk faster than anyone else, or unlikely so. So people spread out during the day, but in the evenings or the mornings, you all start off as a group. Is that something that you discovered as well when you were doing the Bardsey walk on your own?
It wasn't for me because I was sleeping outside, and I wasn't trying to sleep in the B&Bs that are listed in the back of the guidebook or on the Pilgrim Route website. I did see a couple of people more than once, but I didn't end up on the island with anybody that I'd seen earlier in the journey. I don't think it's going particularly fast or particularly slow. I just think we were going at such different paces that I arrived at a different time to them. And possibly because I wasn't quite going on the official route. I was slightly going around it in places because there were particular things I wanted to see that I had seen on the first walk. I think also possibly that, I didn't mind that I wasn't, in the end, that I wasn't walking with people, because it did feel very much as though I was walking with the past, possibly walking with the future as well, but walking with people from past, either the people that I'd walked with, because I took my diaries with me from the first journey, or with people who had walked that route over hundreds of years.
So I was going to ask, when you set out on writing about this, did you set out to write it as a memoir or as a kind of travel piece? But it developed, well, you were saying actually you saw the Parthian books call and you thought, I can pitch in some. So you set out to do it as travel writing, but a lot of it is memoir, isn't it?
I think there's a really interesting intersection here. I mean, what I've done is deliberately write it as episodic memory. So it takes people into the moment and we're there. And I very rarely hesitate back out to provide any narrative about the narrative. I'm deliberately not putting too much commentary into it, except as it was experienced on the road or the path or in the wood or whatever. And I had quite a long thought about the process beforehand, because I think one of the things that's happening in travel writing, as indeed it has happened in nature writing, is that there's a shift going on at the moment that more travel writing is memoir oriented than it used to be, possibly because of the lead that nature writing has taken, possibly because people have got Wikipedia and Google, and also people travel a lot, and some of the guidebook stuff they'll find if they go and look at a guidebook. I think about people like Bill Bryson, whose book I love, A Walk in the Woods, which is the Appalachian Trail, which is a story about a walk that doesn't work. He doesn't get even a quarter of the way with his mate cats. But I do love the blend that he has there of episodic memory and semantic memory. And if I'd had 8,000 words, I might have done something similar. There might have been more about the places that I passed, the people I saw, the geology, the flora, the fauna, the that I encountered as I moved through the landscape. But there isn't. I got 4,000 words. I kept to the narrative of the journey rather than the stuff that surrounds and, if you like, provided the fabric for the journey.
Yes, because quite a lot of people write about the people they meet, don't they? And there's less of that in your piece.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we know you well from writing very short pieces. You've for those in the room who are unaware of this, I've never met Elle in person. I've only ever met her on Zoom or through email, and it started off because she made a submission to the Urban Tree Festival competition that we ran for writers 3 years ago. So I'm very familiar that you've written a lot of very short pieces, and you've also written poetry. So what was it like writing a longer form? Did you find it easy?
My main thing is, if you like, I'm very aware that different length pieces require a different kind of approach to the storytelling, and also that a piece of memoir hybrid travel is different to a piece of flat fiction or a prose poem or whatever, that these have got different, if you like, plot types, as well as different narrative structures, as well as different impetus to them. So I've written a few other pieces which are the same sort of length as this, and then I've written a novella which is 30,000 words, although that's fiction. although some of it is based on some real people. And the manuscript for My Family and Other Folklore is 96,000 words. So I feel like, I'm quite good at the breadth. I think the shortest thing that I've ever written that's won anything was 50 words long, and the longest thing so far is about 5,000 words. No, that's not true. 30,000 words. So I'm doing okay. I like the variety.
Yeah, so I mean, of the other writing formats, which appeal to you, and why, or are they all, they're all appealing?
I like creative non-fiction. I like writing non things that are true or things that are real, even if I have created a story arc to tell the people. I think all memoir, all travel writing, all nature writing, and so on, is storyfied in some way. It's edited. People who think they are only writing the truth are possibly misleading themselves, that they are writing half the truth or they are writing the truth partially. I think I probably go through phases that I like particular formats at particular times, but usually it's to do with a story wanting to be told in a particular way. So I'm writing a play at the moment. I've been commissioned to write a short play, which is based on a short story that I wrote. And that's lovely. I'm enjoying that enormously. I know nothing about playwriting, so it's a bit of a challenge, but I know the story really well, so I'm
It's all
enjoying
dialogue, isn't it? It's all dialogue.
Yeah, it's all dialogue, and I tend not to write dialogue. But it's a really good discipline for me to throw myself into that and think about what effect that's going to have on a piece.
And also it's because the actors can cast an expression which would take a lot of time to write, but
Yes,
they can do it
absolutely.
they can do it in an instant, so you don't need to write about it. Yeah,
I
no,
know,
no, I think
it's great.
it's a very different format and challenge.
Yeah,
Well, we've got lot. I
it
mean,
is.
I know. As I mentioned, Sonia, I know has published books, and but I don't know about other people. But um, there aren't any questions in the chat yet. I've got to encourage people to either write them in the chat or literally turn off your mic and leap in and stop me asking questions. So I've run now about half a dozen workshops with Elle, and if not more, and we've also had various events in which we've both been contributors. So I kind of know her quite well, but I'd love to keep asking her questions. I mean, in terms of practical questions about how you write, how much of your writing or research is undertaken out and about on foot? Oh, there we are,
Yeah, and I can
Sonia.
see Sonia's
In fact,
question.
Sonia,
Yeah,
you can answer that
fantastic.
question. How, I promise you, you wrote that before I'd spoken it, or no, I'd spoken it before you wrote it. So, Sonia, do you want to sort of say that yourself? Brilliant.
Hello, El. Yeah, I'm very interested in your process. My experience of writing, particularly on my pilgrimage, was a combination of what I'd call ambulatory note taking. So I would do a lot of walking and writing at the same time, and also walking and pausing in place and gathering material. And then I would also do reflective writing at the end of the day. Do you do something similar? How do you keep track of your thoughts? Do you write on foot? What's your process?
I tend to stop very often and then just jot down. It might be an observation, it might be a kind of an internal narrative, it might be something I've seen. I might draw something. I might. Sometimes I would sit and something would occur to me about a previous day or a previous action, and I might jot that down as well. And then usually at the end of the day, I might look over what I've written and just write a few short things on what I've written. So the process of memorializing memorising what's happened is going on. The other thing I do is usually beforehand, if I'm going on something like a walk, I will have done a lot of research in advance about what the walk is going to look like and what I should look out for, and what the map route is. And I will have read some guidebooks, I will have read some history books, I might have read some other things about the geography or the geology, or the flora that I can expect to see on the way and things like that. So I do quite a lot of it beforehand. And then usually what I do at the end of a trip is read through everything, put everything together in a notebook or something like that. Make sure on Friday I took the maps with me that I'd used on my walk in 1991, just to show people. I've got the travel timetable still when we caught the bus from Aberdaron, and that's a slightly mad thing to keep, but I kind of like the ephemera that accretes around a journey like this. I think the other thing that I do when I think about writing on foot is I quite often send postcards home, usually to it used to be to my mum and dad, but now just to my dad, and to my partner, and then I look at what I wrote, because sometimes that's different to what I write to myself, and that can be quite an interesting parallel narrative to consider.
Yeah, if I can pitch in too, because what you say there is, if you write a postcard, you write it longhand. What about when you're do you write everything longhand, or do you do bits of both?
I've never taken anything electronic with me on a walk. I've just bought a mobile phone for the first time ever, which is it's exciting and also really weird. And I used it today to to photograph a couple of things, and I thought, wow, normally I would be writing that down, and now I've been able to take a photograph of it. I haven't had a camera either. I don't use that at all. And it has been a bit odd, really. I like longhand, and I normally write all pieces longhand first. Not quite all, but most, I would say.
Wow, yeah, and to tear through drafts, or how how good is the how good is the first draft? Is it so good? I can't remember now who it was that we had. I think it was Tom Chivers, um, who was a salon guest earlier in the year, and he said that he only writes one draft, but he spends a lot of time writing it.
Yeah, I think it may depend on if you are someone who does a plot or a plan in advance. I normally do plot out what the different elements are and roughly what order I want to write about them in before I start. I think that's because I picked that up from when I was an academic and also supervising postgraduate students to write their theses, and getting very clear about this is how, not necessarily this is how, but this is the way I found works for me to structure a longer piece and to have it so that the sequence works. And I found that if I plot it and plan it, the number of drafts I write is fewer. I normally do a generative draft, do a revision draft, make sure I haven't really totally screwed it up, and then I do a draft where I check on the language to make it more interesting, and I do things like put it into a word cloud and find out that I have used the word beautiful. Or in this one, I use miserable too often. I found I use miserable a lot in this particular piece. But usually a word cloud will help me spot that, and I will change it for something else more interesting.
Well, I think that's all sort of fascinating because I always remember sort of reading about Brian Eno's music oblique, and
Hmm.
David Bowie's way he cut up lyrics so that he could sort of come out with new lyrics. Um, I think there are techniques that are that individuals develop in all sorts of ways to write something that's new or more pertinent to them. But do
Mm.
you tend to think about the audience that you're writing for? Or are you just writing for yourself? How much of a balance is that?
When I'm writing notes, if I'm on a trip, it's always for myself. It's only later that I think about who the audience. So this piece for Parthian, I thought, who's the audience? Who is the editor? What kind of things might work for them? And I think that with all pieces of creative nonfiction, actually, I think about that with fiction as well. I think about who the audience is going to be, who's likely to read it, what they might be hoping for in a piece of writing. I think I also probably, like I write different things for different people. So if somebody wants a blog, that will be very different to a single chapter, or if somebody wants an editorial piece or a column, those are different forms and they ask different things of a reader. So it means that correspondingly it asks different things of a writer, I think.
Okay, anyone else for a question? Do fire away.
Yeah, I've got one.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna. Yeah, please do.
Um, we're offered many predetermined routes for pilgrimages, and many are happy to undertake those. And so it's a question for Elle first, but to open it up to the wider group as well. If you were going to undertake your own personal pilgrimage, you were going to design your own pilgrimage. What would it be? What would it be based around?
I
And when?
love that. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it would be based around the different foraging sites that we went to when I was a child. I grew up in quite a hard up working class family, and there were particular sites that we went to with my granny and granddad in Surrey, and then particular sites around where I grew up in Hertfordshire. And we've got local maps of those two places and also of my other grandmother who lived in Lincolnshire. And I loved the idea of possibly linking those three routes, which were local routes, which were seasonal routes, so that happened at different times of the year, to pick different things that were available for free, because they were things that we used to enhance and vary our diet quite a lot. My uncle in Lincolnshire was a gamekeeper, so there would also have been surplus game from him as well. Yeah, I think that would be. Oh, that's given me a nice idea. I love the idea of going and visiting those three sites.
Yeah, it's really delightful. Anyone else?
Silence. You struck us all dumb. Um,
I'd have to go back to where I grew up in the Fens and walk all of the precarious dike edges that I was never allowed to walk as a child. So it'd be lovely to do that. Join up all of those banks that they're still quite dangerous because there doesn't tend to be any footpath between the bank and the road. But then you can see the horizon for miles, so if something's coming. That would be a lovely pilgrimage for me.
I love that idea of forbidden footpaths. That would be super.
yeah, I think certainly that if I were choosing it would be a pilgrimage of trespass. One of the things I've always found sort of slightly fascinating is why people choose to live in such remote or private places. So what are they fearful of almost? And I like to go up to their front door and discover there would be a pilgrimage to to the front door of some of these more hard to reach places, I think, but not just hard to reach, but they make it hard for you to reach. I mean, today I was walking in the Surrey Hills, and there's a band of properties that where I'm sure if you're familiar with walking anywhere in sort of southern England, you're fairly familiar with what you find is that there's a sort of huge gate which you can't see round or look over, but if you go about 100 yards further down the road, you can peer over into their extensive parkland, and then there's a long drive, and there's probably nowadays a sort of video intercom. Well, those are the ones that I'd like to go and walk to their front door. I'm not sure how that could be arranged, Anna. If you'd like to sort that, that'd be great. Babak, Catherine, Nikki, what are your
I can see one from
pilgrimages?
Catherine in the chat actually. Catherine asks, did you study creative writing as a discipline, Elle? No, I didn't. I started writing 2 years ago at the start of lockdown. It seemed like a good thing to do, given that lockdown made lots of things impossible. And since then, I have had published 189 pieces.
It's immensely successful.
Yes, immensely successful. I know. I worked really hard. I know. And I'm now teaching mainly creative non-fiction and flash fiction for a lot of different festivals, as well as for Walk, Listen, Create, and for the Urban Tree Festival, and so on. And for the Club, I teach a 5-week creative non-fiction workshop to help people who are putting together a longer manuscript. That's really fun, and that's intended to be writers teaching writers. So we share what we know, but I'm holding the space and facilitating the process because I've got ideas about it. How are you managing teaching and writing? It's a great question. I think I have made use of the last 2 years to really sort of start from scratch, but work hard and fast. Before the pandemic happened, I was doing a lot of caring for my dad. And then when the pandemic happened, he went into supported housing, and I was then given quite a lot more time. A lot of my field work stopped during the pandemic, and anything I was doing I could do from home, or it was archive stuff, or it was looking at field reports and things like that and collating stuff. And at the moment I'm doing some work on antiquities theft and cultural property, tracking stuff that's coming out of the war in Ukraine and seeing what's going on in terms of illegal smuggling and stuff like that always happens during a conflict like this. And so some of that can be done from home. You use modern trip groups to see who's selling what to whom and where it's going and where it might end up. But the pandemic, whilst being awful in every way that we all know about, did actually change the shape of my life considerably and gave me this space to write and to teach writing as well, after I'd been writing for about a year and a half.
I still think that Elle doesn't sleep, by the way. I'm fairly certain she never sleeps.
7 hours every night. 7 hours, minimum of 7 hours.
I don't know. I tell you, if I have to sit down and write something longhand, it takes me an absolute age to get it down on paper. I'm really, I really admire someone who A, has the ability to do that, but B, is disciplined enough to make it happen. So fantastic, Elle. Now we're getting actually close to that time when we let Elle have a bit of a rest from speaking, and we have a multiple choice quiz. But are there any other questions that have been prompted? And
I like Sonia's comment about teaching that requires marking. I used to be an academic, and I'm really glad I'm not now. I wouldn't want to be now. My God. Yeah. Sorry, Babak, please.
What is bringing you to Athens? Is it pleasure or is it writing?
It's 3 things. It's one is that some friends of mine got in touch with me about a month ago and said, "We're hiring a boat for the summer. Do you want to come for some of it and be our resident archaeologist?" Which I thought was great because it's not my period and it's not my culture at all. But I can read books. I've read up quite a lot. I now know more than I did, say, 6 weeks ago. The second thing is that I've arranged to meet a couple of colleagues who are involved in antiquities theft and the return of cultural property and art crime. It's mainly antiquities theft that they're concerned with, and that we're looking at how they're building their database to track and to monitor what's going on in this part of the Mediterranean in terms of shipping routes out of the Middle East, Central Asia, some of it, and the Arabian Peninsula and Turkey and Syria and so on, and Ukraine and southern parts of Eastern Europe. And also, I'm hoping that something will emerge over the next 10 days that I want to write about. I'm hoping.
That was going to be my next question.
So.
Yeah, so you haven't gone in with a plan on creating the atmosphere for writing something on your trip.
Not yet. I mean, my general policy is if people ask me to do stuff like these friends saying, "Will you come with us on our boat to the Cyclades?" I just thought, yes, I will. I can fit that in around my teaching and festival stuff this summer. Yes, I will come. I have no idea what's going to happen. I've got a faint
you have to lean
idea.
into serendipity.
I totally do. When people say, "Do you want to do so and so?" and I think, can I make that work around the other jobs that I'm doing? And if I can, I will always do it, because you just don't know what's going to happen, and it could be amazing.
I like your mentioning at the start of saying that you are now the resident archaeologist on this boat trip on the Mediterranean. Yes. You can, of course, always be the resident archaeologist. Like in today's cafe, you are the resident archaeologist.
I know, it's great, isn't it? Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's just convenient. I think I might be the only archaeologist they know, but it's often the case. People might know field archaeologists, but they might not know that they know them. And as I say, it's not my specialism. I'm a Neolithic person, and I specialise in prehistoric tattoos. So really, this is outside of my ball. Hit something for 6.
Prehistoric tattoos.
I spotted that Catherine has unmuted herself. Catherine, have you got a question to ask?
Oh, no. I unmuted myself in case I had a question. But my question's been answered. No, it's just, I suppose I find it quite hard because Elle seems to know so much about how to write, and yet hasn't studied creative writing. So anyway, that gives me hope that maybe in about 10 years or so, I may know as much as she does.
Oh, of course you will. You'll know more, definitely. I mean, I have read a bit over the last 2 years. I've read people's craft books. I've got a whole shelf of craft books at home. And by craft books, I mean people talking about the craft of writing, whether it's creative non-fiction or travel or fiction or how to write a novel in 3 easy goes, that kind of thing. And I've been to some workshops. I've sat in on some sessions and practiced writing and discovered how bad I can be, and also discovered that sometimes I have a nice turn of phrase, I get the structure right, it speaks to somebody. Hooray.
Great. So you talked about the it was, I think the other day, 5 or 7 themes in writing stories.
Sure, yeah, there's 7 plot types.
Yeah. So what part were you playing when you did your pilgrimage to Bardsey Island?
I think I'm the full triumphant. Yeah, it may be Voyage and Return. Some of it's Voyage and Return, but I think I've written it as the full triumphant. Yeah.
Okay,
that's
right.
the plot type. Yeah. Which I think lots of people can resonate with in terms of unsuccessful walks. Yeah, it's also a quest. It is also a quest narrative, and I think it's probably also a bit of bit of monster in the house that has to be overcome, which is my the knee is my monster in the house, and the blisters are my monster in the house, but mostly my knee.
The only person who hasn't asked a question either in the chat or spoken it is Nikki. So, Nikki, before we move on to multiple choice, have you a question? Because if not, we'll go straight into a multiple choice.
Yeah, I can ask a question. Thank you. It's been, I mean, fascinating. I've obviously had a lazy lockdown. I haven't written that much at all. So you said, well, you said many interesting things, but you did say about creative non-fiction, which I'm kind of exploring as well. You said that like something like everything is storyfied. Maybe you've already answered this, but I just wondered, like in travel writing, what kind of decisions did you make in your writing that sort of to elevate it, I mean not elevate, to enhance it with story, other than those plots
Sure.
that you just mentioned? Yeah.
Sure. I did work quite hard on the language to make sure that there were some really interesting, distinctive pieces of language throughout the piece. Now, a couple of times my editor made me take them out and said it was too rich and I had over seasoned the soup. Fair enough. And I think that some of the other choices were the first version that I wrote had much more about the first Pilgrim, the one I did in my early 20s, and then I realised that I was repeating a lot of the route in the final one, which is the one I thought was more interesting. But then braiding these two other narratives from when I was 6 and when I was in my early 20s into this final narrative became, I think, important, that there was something to contrast the current experience with, which was the past experiences. And then the denouement refers back to the original walk as well, or the original experience as well. And that braiding, I think, was probably important. So I was braiding a story, but I was braiding more than one story.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, Elle, a big thank you. We still can't see you. We don't know what's going on in the cupboard in Greece. Would you like to try and reveal yourself? It's like mystery shopper,
Let's see
isn't
if I
it?
can manage it.
Well, it's been a very unusual evening, but a very enjoyable one. And Elle, we really want to thank you for that, but also to everyone else for making it a real pleasure to have Elle in the salon. So we'll see you all again soon, somewhere, someday. In the meantime, yeah, Nikki, as you say, off to write 180 published pieces to be written.
Absolutely, get out there.
All right.
Absolutely,
Good luck, everyone.
absolutely. There's all kinds of deadlines coming up now, so pay attention. Yeah, off to mark, off to write. My thing, which I say to all writing groups, is what's the best that can happen if you decide to submit your work? What's the best that can happen? Because you never know. Thank you, everybody. That was really lovely. Lovely to talk about the piece.